we're saying your gut is going to protect long-term loyalty and identity, where data may have you make short-term efficiency decisions that are going to harm your guest experience. So one of the questions you can ask yourself, and this is an important question, is this a purely operational decision I'm making, or am I changing something that is the reason why people love coming here? Is it the reason why they love our bar? And if your guests, their experience, what they love is going to be negatively impacted by a decision, I don't want to do it regardless of the ROI. Hello and welcome to the Bar Business Podcast, where we help bar owners increase profits, attract loyal guests, and simplify operations so you can avoid burnout and finally enjoy your life outside of your bar. I'm your host, Chris Schneider, the Bar Business Coach. The Bar Business Podcast is brought to you by QuickSpec. And full disclosure, I'm a co-founder. We built QuickSpec to give you back your time and help you work smarter, not harder. QuickSpec connects your POS data, layers in real-world context, and gives you actionable forecasts and KPI dashboards that allow you to make data-driven decisions so you can spend less time guessing and more time on what matters. Staff smarter, order better. Stop planning for rushes that never show up or getting caught off guard by the ones that do. When you make decisions based upon real data, not guesswork, you get your time back and your team runs smoothly. Check it out at quickspec.com. That's QUIXSPEC.com. And make sure to sign up for our early access program on the homepage. Today on the Bar Business Podcast, discover why perfect bar metrics can still lead to the wrong decisions. Learn how to spot hidden value your dashboards do not measure, like loyalty, culture, and guest experience. And master a simple way to blend data and instinct so you can improve performance without optimizing away the magic. If you've listened to this podcast for any length of time, you have heard me talk about why we should rely on data over our gut. Because quite frankly, a lot of times our gut's wrong. A lot of times when we rely on data, we make smarter decisions that drive our business forward in ways that we would never do if we only relied on our gut. So I believe in metrics. I believe in data. Everything I do, the coaching, the consulting, the books I write, it's all based upon knowing numbers, data analysis to drive your business forward. Heck, I founded QuickSpec, which is all about data analysis. But here's the thing. Yes. Should you trust data over your gut when you do something like pricing? Absolutely. Should you trust data over your gut 90% of your decisions? Yes. But if you only trust gut, if you don't rely on those instincts you've built over the years as a hospitality professional, you're not going to win. So today we're talking about why the data isn't always the only thing you should rely on, and where your gut should actually be what drives your business forward. So first I want to go through and talk about for a little bit what data can't see. So data is great, right? We can look at dwell times. We can look at sales per labor hour. We can look at guest check averages. We can look at revenue. We can look at weather and events, how those should impact our revenue in the future and do forecasts and things. But data is transactional by nature. Your dashboards show spends. They show visits. It's not relational. You're not seeing referrals, reviews, social proof, community gravity. There's a lot that data cannot measure. Now, in theory, we could do sentiment analysis, which would give us some data on those points. But even through sentiment analysis, all we're doing is measuring what people think about your bar online. And let's be honest here, a lot of us rely on regulars that are not like online people all the time. I know a lot of my friends in the real world don't have social media even. So there's a balance here that we have to get to. And it's all about putting efficiency against experience. We know what our guests are looking for is experience. They don't care how efficient we are. And a lot can be said for the last 20 years in hospitality, efficiency winning over experience and hurting experience in the name of efficiency. Now, if you're a fast food place, yeah, you want to be efficient. You're not worried about experience. But for those of us in the bar industry, we're trying to make people have memories, connect with them emotionally. So experience is key. And this especially comes into play when we think about things like community events. One of the things I am a big fan of, and I think I've talked about it here before, is giving people rooms at cost, giving people food at cost. Connecting with your community in ways that don't make sense on paper definitely don't help your data, but that build regulars, that build trust, that build a name for yourself within the community that's going to push your bar forward. So what are 5 decisions where I think more often than not, gut is going to beat the data? One is keeping a money-losing menu item. So that sounds weird, right? Because I wrote that book, Menus That Sell, that's right behind me. It's all about menu engineering, cutting out the fat on your menu, getting rid of things that don't make you money. All of those things you should focus on. But even in the book I mentioned, sometimes people just like something and you want to keep it around and you don't want to raise the price on it. That's okay. When we have an anchor on our menu that's all about loyalty, that's all about our guests, sometimes it's better to accept that we're not going to make money on that item, but to keep it there. And a great example of this is if you have an item that pulls people in, right? A signature dish that you're known for. Yeah, you want to make money on it, right? But maybe it's not going to be the best gross margin item on our menu because we're actually selling it at a bit of a discount. That's bringing people in the door. It's kind of a perma special, if you will. Keeping that there, that's bringing in business. Because when you have that four top come in because somebody really wants that item, the other three people may or may not order it. You sell four of that item to a four top, they all have a drink. Yeah, you're pushing on the food, you might be making money on the drinks, and that's it. But it gave you a four top. So sometimes that losing menu item is actually good for you. What's another place where your gut can beat the numbers? Well, potentially overstaffing a slow shift. Now, obviously, we always want to keep our labor low, and this is going to be somewhat state dependent. If you're in California, if you're in San Francisco, and you're facing some of the highest wages in the country, that's a lot different than if you're in one of the states that still has federal minimum wage, right? Someone for me in Indiana, a server costs $2.13 an hour. Now, I always say pay people more than minimum, but at minimum, that's going to cost me $2.13. In California, it's like San Francisco, I think it's $18 or $19 an hour is the absolute minimum. So in Indiana, it's easier to overstaff than in California. But sometimes I want to be a little bit overstaffed just so that I make sure everybody has a great experience to protect those relationships, allow our service to shine, and to build evangelists in the community that are going to go out and talk about what a great experience they had at your bar. There's a balance here. It's hard to do. Oftentimes, what that means is just accepting a slightly higher labor cost than maybe the math tells you should. But don't be afraid to overstaff or more importantly, maybe said the opposite way. Don't try to make your team so efficient you hurt your guest experience. Efficiency can only go so far with your labor. The third place where I think your gut can beat the data is preserving some inefficient layouts. So I've talked a lot about optimizing layouts, looking at walk paths in bars, making sure that everything in your operation is geared towards efficiency. But sometimes in a bar, we want that little tucked away booth in the corner that's hard to get to and annoying to serve. Sometimes we want to put something by the bar that's going to make it hard for people to smash up against it and be efficiently served. And that's okay. Your optimization of your layout of your bar should never interfere with your vibe. Vibe comes before layout optimization. So you have to think about that. Another place where I don't think the data wins is, and we've talked about this with hiring a lot, but hire for emotional intelligence over resume. You don't want to hire people that are going to hurt your vibe, hurt your environment, hurt the way that your guests interact with your bar. So oftentimes, if we can hire the right person based upon their attitude, their emotional intelligence versus a resume, we're going to be more successful. And the final place is when it comes to pricing, particularly beyond what we talked about before with a money losing menu item. But when we're looking at price, sometimes we want a price below what an ideal model shows for, quite frankly, ease for our team. Now, this is less important now because we take a lot less cash than we used to in this business. But if something is $7 even, it's a heck of a lot easier to deal with than if it's $7.13 if you have cash. So bars still, even though we're taking less cash, tend to price that way. And quite frankly, I have always enjoyed it where the price includes the sales tax. It includes everything. I like to do that across food and beverage. Now, obviously, not everybody makes that choice. But when you do that, you greatly decrease your need for things like change. And it makes it easier when you do have a cash customer for your team to get in there and give your guests quick service because they aren't counting a bunch of change. So while you might be pricing something a little lower, you are making efficiency gains that are going to make it. Now, if we think about those 5 items, what's the pattern here? Well, we're saying your gut is going to protect long-term loyalty and identity, where data may have you make short-term efficiency decisions that are going to harm your guest experience. So one of the questions you can ask yourself, and this is an important question, is this a purely operational decision I'm making, or am I changing something that is the reason why people love coming here? Is it the reason why they love our bar? And if your guests, their experience, what they love is going to be negatively impacted by a decision, I don't want to do it regardless of the ROI. Now, obviously, there's a balance there that you have to reach, and you should never go to the point where you say, well, people love this, so it can never change. It can change. People will adapt. But not every decision should be made based on KPIs and efficiency. always have to consider relationship. Now, when it comes to data driven decisions, what are 3 blind spots that we often run into? Because we've talked about 5 decisions where your gut can beat the data. But why is that? Well, as I said in the intro, data is going to measure transactions, not relationships. Data driven decisions are based upon what the data is telling us. It doesn't tell you who bought what. It doesn't tell you how stressed your team is. It doesn't tell you what your guests actually think. It just tells you, based upon the data available to me right now, this is what makes the most sense. A lot of times when we make data driven decisions, if we're not smart, we're optimizing for today and not tomorrow. In fact, you could be optimizing for today at the expense of tomorrow. And for this, I'm going to give you an example outside of hospitality. And I think most of us that own businesses or are managers in this industry, we've looked at other industries too. And if you look at the big Fortune 500 companies, there's a pattern among some of the CEOs. They know how to get in there, optimize a company, fix it up, and then they go to the next one. They're data-driven decision makers who are all about figuring out how to squeeze the last dollar out of the company to increase the stock price. But there's also a pattern that we don't talk about as much. You'll see a lot of those folks go from company to company, doing great things, increasing the number, increasing the stock values. But what happens when they leave? They've optimized their company for today because that's all they're worried about, because they're going to be at a different company tomorrow. Now, as a bar owner, you don't have that option. This bar is yours today, tomorrow, and forever, or at least until you sell it. So you have to make sure we're not optimizing today at the expense of tomorrow. That is, quite frankly, the easiest pitfall to fall into and the most expensive one if you're trying to do purely data-driven decision making. Now, the third place that data-driven decisions can get you in a bit of a blind spot is you've assumed everything is rational and you've ignored the magic. Now, what is that magic? It's the sense of belonging your guests get. It's the memories they make in your establishment. It's the identity that they have tied to your establishment. And so when we focus too much on the rational, we can lose all of that magic and end up making decisions that, yes, might make us more efficient, might make us more profitable in the short term again, right? Because we're not optimizing for the long term. But we're going to hurt that experience. And what do guests want today? They want experience. So we can never optimize and hurt ourselves by not knowing the blind spots in data-driven decision making. Does that mean we shouldn't make data-driven decisions? Well, no. I still stand by everything I've always said. They are more productive than gut decisions generally. They are better than gut decisions. But every time we make a decision, look at the data, think about what the data is telling you, and then think about what that's going to do for your guests, for your vibe, for your environment, for your experience. Now, if you kind of put this all together, what are we really talking about here? We're talking about expensive loyalty. So in an optimized bar, we may have better margins per transaction. We may have a lower retention. We may have a great experience, but that lower retention piece. We have lower retention in a perfectly optimized. In a loyalty bar, we're going to have worse prime costs. We're going to have higher retention, though. What does higher retention mean? A lower customer acquisition cost. In an optimized bar, where it's all about the data, and that's all we're focusing on, you're probably going to have a higher customer acquisition cost. In a loyalty bar, we're going to have a higher lifetime value because we're retaining those guests longer. In an optimized data-only bar, we're going to have a much lower lifetime value because the guests aren't retaining. They're not sticking around as much. So to really optimize for profit, we have to optimize both for our data-driven decisions and for that experience. And quite frankly, in the neighborhood bar segment, optimized bars are not going to last long. Loyalty bars are, quite frankly. A little plug for my buddy Dave. And Dave, if you pick up their book, Tale of Two Taverns, that's what this book covers, right? It's basically the difference between optimized and loyalty. Optimized is great, but if you don't remember that loyalty bar idea, you're going to fail most of the time. Now, when should we trust the data? Well, there are some times where your gut, relationships, experiences don't matter as much as the data does. For example, if you're losing money and denial is driving your decisions, we need to rely on the data. If you keep repeating the same failing bet, we need to recognize it failed and rely on the data. You are too close emotionally to these things to see clearly, we need to rely on the data. If what we're dealing with is purely operations and not culture, for instance, your kitchen setup, which type of cheese you choose, we could argue that's experiential too, but quite frankly, most people can't tell the difference in different types of cheese. We can make operational-based data-driven decisions rather than culture-based emotional decisions. But the biggest thing where we need to pick data over gut, over emotion, is if you have no intuition. And that's one I don't know how you determine if you don't have intuition for something. But I will tell you right now, there are certain things I am really good at pulling out of my gut and knowing that I'm correct. There are other things where that's not the case. There are places where I know I tend to not consider all the data where I should. There are places where I know I consider too much data and I shouldn't. But you have to know how intuitive you are. You have to know your own strengths and weaknesses, because in some places you're going to have no intuition. And in those spots, you should always rely on the data, or have someone that you're working with that has good intuition in that space and rely on them and the data, right? We always should trust the data. We always should trust our gut. We just need to figure out how to fuse those two when we make decisions. So how do we do that? What is the actual ideal decision-making process here? Well, we want to take that data and the gut, smash them together, and that's going to give us the better decisions that we need to really create a bar where our vibe, our environment, our guest loyalty is top notch, and our KPIs, our menu pricing, our server training, our layout are all optimized for our business. So, how do we do this? Step one, let data identify the problems, right? Easiest way to know you have a problem or somewhere where you can optimize your business is to look at the data. So, let's let data identify those problems. And let's use data to go through root cause analysis till we get down to the core of that problem. What is actually causing this? Then let your intuition provide the context. The data is just numbers on a page. The context, how your guests are, how your team is. You know that as an owner. You can let your intuition provide the context to the data. Then let's create a test, just like we would with all our data-driven decisions, with everything we do, and track those results. And then document what you learned and use that to either change a standard, create a new standard, or if what you realize is you didn't do better than you were before, go back to the way you were doing it maybe. Always involve your intuition, your gut in what you're doing. The other thing too here that's very true is that through things like sentiment analysis, NPS scores, we can try to make data out of guest experience and that intuition, but having that data and trusting your gut, doing that together, that's always going to get you to the best place possible. So what should we always think about? What is this data actually measuring? What is my gut based on? What costs, or what is the cost of being wrong in this case? How can I run a test, and what would the ideal test be? And what would my best regular think of this idea? Sometimes I just go ask regulars. I used to do that all the time. I had a certain set of regulars in each group that came into my bar, and I'd just go ask them questions. They'd answer them. But we want to integrate data with our gut. Analytics are powerful. Data is powerful. Data-driven decision-making, 9 times out of 10, is the absolute correct way to make every decision in your bar. But every time, before you make a data-driven decision, you need to step back, think about your gut, think about what the impact is on kind of the softer side of your business outside those numbers, and make sure that you're making the right choice for your bar. That about wraps it up for today. If you enjoyed today's insights, make sure you like, subscribe, and leave a review. If you are ready to take your bar to the next level, schedule a strategy session with me by clicking the link in the show notes below. Until next time, have a great day, and we will talk again later.